Today we're unboxing an iPhone XS Max that should be running its original software version, iOS 12. I picked this up for a really good deal on eBay. It was only $76 plus shipping. So let's go ahead and get it opened up. And here is our iPhone. Right at first glance, it's looking to be in pretty good condition. There's just some pretty light surface scratches on the display, and turning the device over, it looks pretty nice back here as well. We do have a silver model here with this kind of like iridescent, almost like light gray glass. And this stainless steel band just has some really light wear. Let's see if it has any battery power. So I'm not getting a response from holding the power button, so let's connect a lightning cable. And with that connected, we do get our battery charging screen. So I'll give this some time to charge up and I will resume the video when it's ready. Okay, well I left the iPhone XS Max to charge for several hours and it has now powered up. And it booted straight into this lock screen with the default wallpaper for this model. And this wallpaper is live, so that's a great sign that it's running its original version. So let's go ahead and swipe up to open. And from the home screen, there are a few signs that this is running iOS 12. I'm honestly not as sharp about all of these differences on the newer iOS versions, but I know that the TV app here is one big giveaway. So I believe the appearance of this Apple TV logo means that this is a later version of iOS 12. And also certain details like the white music icon means that this is no newer than iOS 13. But anyway, let's jump into settings so we can confirm that. And nice, we do see that this iPhone is running iOS 12.3.1. And this is a base model 64GB storage configuration. While we're here in settings, let's also take a look at the battery health. And it's actually reporting at 100% maximum capacity. I'll get this iPhone connected to Coconut battery on my Mac so we can see the amount of battery cycles. I found out that this iPhone only has 93 cycles on the battery with over 100% maximum capacity. This specific unit was manufactured in early 2019 and it definitely appears that it wasn't used much at all. So the iPhone XS Max was released in September 2018 alongside the regular XS as well as the XR. And these 2018 iPhones really focused on getting the new iPhone design language to all models. So each of those three models now had the full edge-to-edge display with no home button and Face ID. And that was really cool because that design had just launched 1 year prior with the 2017 iPhone X. But one of the downfalls of that iPhone X was its relatively small size. As you can see here on the right, even though the iPhone X had a 5.8-inch display, which was bigger than any previous iPhone, the overall footprint of this device was noticeably smaller than the previous Plus model iPhones. So like I have here on the left with the iPhone 7 Plus, these had a 5.5-inch display. But these Plus model iPhones that users had been used to since 2014 were physically larger than the 10 due to the bezel size. So for 2018, it was really important for Apple to bring the XS Max here that brought the premium iPhone features in a really large size that users had come to love. The naming that Apple chose for these 2018 iPhones was very interesting, as in some ways it was the last of an era and in some ways it was the beginning of one. So this was the last S model iPhone ever, and those S models were something Apple had been known for dating all the way back to 2009. So it was basically the rhythm of releasing an all-new device 1 year, and then the following year just making some small improvements to that and calling it an S model. So we saw that with the iPhone 3G and 3GS, the 4 and 4S, the 5 and 5S, as well as the 6 and 6S. Apple took a break from the S models in 2016 and 17 with the iPhone 7, 8, and 10, but it was brought back here for the XS one last time. It was also the last iPhone to be named with a Roman numeral. So starting just 1 year prior, Apple had used the Roman numeral X to represent 10 for the 10th year anniversary iPhone. And just 1 year after this, in 2019, they would revert to normal numbers with the iPhone 11 and so on. I thought the use of Roman numerals for these models was really cool, but it always irritated me when people would misuse it. So it seemed like the majority of people would mistakenly call the devices iPhone X, iPhone XR, iPhone XS Max. And one more point about the naming of this iPhone is that this was the first Max model ever. And the Max naming is something we still see today with the iPhone 16 Pro Max. And at the time, Apple explained that the new Max name was being used because this iPhone was bigger than the previous Plus models. So the display here measured at 6.5 inches diagonally. And now with the naming quirks out of the way, let's talk about what was new for this iPhone compared to the 10. So the 10s models were now IP68 water resistant instead of IP67. There were a few physical differences, like addition of new antenna breaks here where the iPhone 10 had more of a symmetrical look. There was also a new gold color for this model, as it was a bit of a complaint that the iPhone 10 was only offered in silver or space gray. There was a new top-end storage configuration with the 512GB model. That joined the 256GB as well as the 64GB base configuration. And the device was more powerful now with the A12 Bionic chip. And that was a 6-core chip clocked at 2.5 GHz. It was quoted to be 50% faster than the A11 Bionics in graphics performance. The performance cores were quoted to be 15% faster, and it had 50% lower power usage with the efficiency cores. And that chip was now paired to 4GB of RAM on the 10s models. That was up from 3GB on the 10. The cameras on these models also got a pretty nice bump. They now had a feature Apple dubbed Smart HDR. And when using portrait mode, you can now adjust the depth of field after taking the photo. This was also the first dual SIM iPhone with a physical SIM and an eSIM. And the cameras now recorded stereo audio instead of mono. There was only a very slight jump in battery life from the 10 though. So the 10s was quoted to have 30 minutes longer battery life and the 10s Max had 90 minutes longer. Apple would go on to really make a big jump in battery life with the iPhone 11 lineup. And this model, along with the 10s, was discontinued altogether in September 2019 with the release of the iPhone 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max. So now let's talk about iOS 12 on this device specifically. So iOS 12 was not a huge feature release. Apple rather took a different strategy with this version to really focus on performance and refinements. As the previous version iOS 11 was pretty notorious for its bugs and iffy performance. This strategy in a way reminds me of the release of Mac OS X Snow Leopard back in 2009, as that version was focused on being a refinement of Leopard rather than being a huge feature release. With that being said though, there were still some cool new features for this version. So the new screen time feature replaced the old restrictions feature. And as the name suggests, this allowed you to get a detailed breakdown on how much time you were spending with your iPhone. There were a lot of nice features within here, and it was really cool to see exactly how long you spent on your iPhone daily. The notifications were now grouped by application in iOS 12, so that really helped cut down on clutter in the notification center. Apple also improved the multitasking experience for devices without a home button on this version. So when using multitasking here on iOS 11 with the iPhone 10, you actually can't just swipe up on the application to close it. That actually takes you back to the home screen. Instead, the procedure for this version was to hold down on the app until these red minus buttons appeared and then swipe them upward. This was just very tedious, and it kind of felt like a step back to older version of iOS multitasking. But with iOS 12, Apple made the experience much more intuitive. This is just like the multitasking we have today, where you just simply swipe upward. There's no other actions necessary. So now let's take a look at the default wallpapers here on iOS 12. First off, we have the dynamic category. This category launched with iOS 7, but Apple had an updated version of these for the OLED display models. So all of these had black backgrounds, and these were really nice for showing off the true black levels of that OLED panel. Next up, we have the stills category here. And most of these were carryovers from iOS 11. I believe the only new image was this one. And this one new choice was the default for iOS 12. But the main star of these show here are the live wallpapers. They looked very similar to what was used on the smaller 10s, but these were just a slight variation. And there's one here for each color that the device launched in. So this was for the space gray model, this one was for the gold model, and this was for the silver model like I have here. And at first glance, these wallpapers look like planets, but I believe they are actually soap bubbles. And these are really fun to use because this was the last iPhone to feature 3D Touch. And 3D Touch was the pressure-sensitive layer in the display that had launched back in 2015 with the iPhone 6s. That feature was removed with the iPhone XR being replaced with haptic touch, and it was eliminated entirely with the iPhone 11 lineup and newer. So you can kind of play with this wallpaper in a way that you couldn't with haptic touch. So I can start to apply pressure to this and then stop and it goes back. And that was different from haptic touch because it was basically a software-based long press that couldn't actually detect your force. And there were some cool features with 3D Touch that made using the UI quite a bit easier. One of my favorites was using 3D Touch on the keyboard. That would basically turn the whole keyboard into a trackpad where you could move around your cursor. And with older iPhones that had 3D Touch, you could firmly click on the edge of the display to access multitasking. So it's really cool to have the last iPhone with 3D Touch here. I miss that feature quite a bit. Something else I've always found really interesting about this device is the way the live wallpaper hides the notch. Even here in 2025, the iPhone XS Max is still a great smartphone. It can run the newest version of iOS 18, however, it will not be receiving the new iOS 26 update in fall 2025. With my unit here on iOS 12, I'm obviously not going to get any sort of modern app updates. But the App Store does work. I was able to download a really large selection of pretty cool games that I will play around with. Also, I did notice that Apple Music still works, but I don't like to keep my devices on their original versions connected to the internet. So I'm thinking I'll just connect this to my computer and sync my iTunes library to it. I know some are really into jailbreaking older devices like this, but I'm more into just playing around with some nostalgic games and listening to music. So that pretty much concludes my look at this iPhone XS Max running iOS 12.3.1. These models are really hard to come by on their original version, so I'm super glad to have this one here for my collection. And although it isn't in the gold color that was new for this model, the silver is still really nice to have. Be sure to get subscribed if you want to see more iPhones running their original software versions. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.